We're in St. John's in Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada, for today's case, back in 2016 when it was home to 46-year-old Marcel Reardon. Marcel was from a huge family with 2 sons himself, 3 brothers and an older sister to whom he was particularly close, and nieces who he doted on. His sister Jacqueline said her brother was the class clown, always wanting to make everyone laugh just by being goofy. He was never afraid to make himself look silly in order to cheer people up. Marcel lived alone downtown after moving about quite a bit. He hadn't felt very settled anywhere for a while, but had recently found a new little apartment which seemed to be working out for him. A big reason he was always looking for somewhere new and never quite felt at home was because in September 2015 tragedy hit the Reardon family. They lost their mother Evelyn to cancer, and Jacqueline said that for Marcel, who was the closest to her, the loss had really taken a toll on him. Jacqueline said that he had hit the bottle hard, leaning on it to numb his pain. Over the months since her death, Marcel's drinking had increased to a dangerous point, and he was spiraling into a terrible place, losing more and more control. He knew it was happening and was trying to pull it back, but was finding it tough now in the midst of an addiction. In early May 2016, several 911 calls were made about Marcel, saying he was intoxicated and acting aggressively. Although when the officers got there, they deemed there wasn't enough to make an arrest, and Marcel seemed to be okay. One of his friends had also run into him at a downtown soup kitchen. She was ahead of him in the queue, and he ran up to her asking to cut in front. "Karen, can I jump ahead of you? I haven't slept and I haven't eaten in 3 days," he said. His family knew he was struggling, but not to this extent. On the evening of May 7, 2016, Marcel visited his sister Jacqueline and brother Scott for dinner. The mood was somber as the aim of the meetup was to put flowers together as a tribute for their mother, something Marcel was finding tough. But the day went as smoothly as it could, and as Marcel said goodbye, they arranged to see each other a few days later for a family barbecue. He told them he was feeling more positive as he had signed up to a welding course so he could get himself back into work and into a good routine. This was great and encouraging news for his family. He hugged Jacqueline and headed off shouting, "Love you, Jackie," as he went. "Don't forget to call me later," she shouted back. Just a few hours later, Marcel was sadly back on the police's radar again. He was arrested for breaching an order not to consume alcohol, and officers had picked him up in a subway begging people for food. He was held in the lockup for his own safety, and when they were happy he had sobered up, they released him at about 1 p.m. the following day. He left the building in his red sweater, a jacket, and his cargo bottoms. He pulled a newspaper out of his jacket and walked off into town. May 9, 2016. Authorities responded to a call from the Harborview Apartments at 91 Brazil Street. The building's superintendent, Jack, had called 911 when a resident had alerted him to something near the stairs to the rear of the building. Someone was lying on the ground, almost tucked under the steps, and the resident thought maybe they were sleeping rough and had taken shelter there overnight. But as they got closer, they saw a pool of blood and what looked like brain matter and bone nearby. The man was wearing a red sweater and cargo bottoms, and inside one of the pockets was a wallet. The wallet contained a folded-up birth certificate. This confirmed that they had found the body of Marcel Reardon. He had been beaten to death. There were marks in the mud near his body which showed he had been dragged there, so where he had actually been killed along with the why wasn't clear. From searching his name and working out the last known place he was living, the apartment he was found by had no links to him at all. More frustratingly still, the camera that was directly above where everything had happened wasn't working. Near to Marcel's body, however, they bagged up some cigarettes and a lighter, as well as an empty beer bottle. The chief medical examiner in Newfoundland and Labrador since 1996 said that Marcel's injuries were some of the most damaging he had seen in all his years, so bad in fact that his family were not allowed to see him. The wounds were largely to the back of his head and were so severe it was impossible to determine how many times he had actually been hit, but it appeared that a hammer had been used. His blood alcohol level was about 4 times the legal limit. Authorities said they had seen a lot in their jobs before, but this case was particularly gory, disturbing, and draining for them. An officer who had been patrolling the Shamrock City area the previous night said that he had given Marcel another warning for being drunk and disorderly outside a bar. This was at 8 p.m., just over 12 hours before he was found dead. The bar in question remembered him and could also point police to the people he was drinking with, Kevin O'Brien and Jessica Peach. They were actually even still outside the bar loitering around. The pair said they were drinking with Marcel along with a woman called and Loris, but they had left him at around 1 a.m. and hadn't seen him after this. They were asked to come in and answer some questions at the station, and they said they were happy to. Both Kevin and Jessica had the same story. On the day of May the 8th, they had been walking around the streets asking people for spare change. Marcel soon tagged along with them. At around 5 p.m., he briefly left the group to go and get some belongings, telling them he would meet them later. As he left, and Norris joined Kevin and Jessica. Jessica knew and fairly well, but Kevin did not. He described her as friendly and attractive, and they got on well. Kevin and Ann went to Anne's apartment just before 8 p.m., before heading back downtown where Marcel joined them. At this point, Marcel was far more intoxicated than they were, being loud and causing them to feel uncomfortable. Marcel had been drinking rum, vodka, beer, and had also taken some unknown pills. He started urinating in the street before falling over and breaking a glass bottle inside his pocket. Kevin said it was upsetting, alarming, and clearly getting out of control. Jessica and Kevin wanted to distance themselves, and they had last seen him at about 1 a.m. The time frame for when he was killed was now getting smaller. So where did he go? Officers asked the pair, and had told them she would get them a taxi and take him to her apartment for some drinks there. Her building was Harbor View Apartments. Police now needed to talk to Ann Norris, and to their shock, hers was a name they actually knew, but for nothing even remotely bad. A lot of Ann's life had revolved around sports, and she was called a star athlete by people. She was frequently in the local papers and on the news. For her and her team's achievements, she was a former basketball player, having played on the Newfoundland and Labrador under-19s team and at the Junior National Championships and at the Canada Games. At the age of just 14, she was a top contender for a spot on the national karate team, soon gaining a black belt. She had attended the University of Prince Edward Island, and all seemed to be on the up for her. But now, years later, she had dropped off the athletics radar and things had taken a turn. She had been charged with assault and threatening people and had been in and out of various mental health clinics. They pulled her in for questioning too. She was cooperative and told the police that she had taken Marcel back to hers. But he had refused to go inside as he wanted to carry on drinking in town. She had tried to coax him in, hoping they could have a few drinks there and he might just fall asleep, but Marcel wasn't having any of it. He wandered off looking to get into a nightclub. She then went back into town and rejoined Kevin and Jessica at about 3:30 a.m. She said she didn't see Marcel again and was shaken up by what had happened to him, especially as this was just outside of her building. She wondered if Marcel had changed his mind and gone back to hers, realizing he wasn't going to get in anywhere and that sleeping it off was the best thing he could do. But he had been met with someone outside that had maybe tried to rob him, or he had got into a drunken argument that had ended terribly, and was upset and asked if she could leave. Officers didn't have any more questions, so they let her go. Fortunately, the streets were lined with cameras and they were making appeals for anyone that had been in the area at that time to come forward, but no one had seen anything. One camera from outside the bar showed Marcel and Kevin walking about. They were all by the taxis just as they had said, and it was 12:44 a.m. Marcel was wearing the same red sweater and appeared to be staggering and falling over, with and trying to help him up at one point, and then stopped to tell Kevin that she was taking Marcel back to hers, before she and Kevin turned back on themselves, walking away from Marcel. Marcel stumbled into the back area of the bars to some stairs. The pair helped him walk to the taxi and then got into the front seat. Kevin said goodbye to and through the window, and Anne and Marcel both drove off, leaving Kevin at the bar. This confirmed all the timelines so far, and the taxi driver could prove that he had dropped them both off at Anne's apartment building. Kevin and Jessica stayed in town buying a few things from a shop and bar hopping until about 3:30 a.m. when they met back up with Anne, just as Anne had said. But now she was wearing different clothes, and asked if she could take Jessica's backpack, and she handed it over. By this time Jessica was very intoxicated, so she waited around while Kevin and Anne walked to get some cigarettes down by the harbor. Kevin asked and why she had gone back with Marcel, and she said he was being a little bit of a dick that night. It was a mistake. While Kevin smoked on the edge of the harbor, he heard splashing around. He turned to see Jessica's backpack floating in the water and said they needed to stay and watch it sink before they left. And Kevin and Jessica then all headed to Anne's apartment to sleep. Just a few hours later, when everyone woke up and told them they both had to get out. And as they were leaving, they ran into police officers and yellow tape outside the front of the building. They had no idea the person they had been with just hours before was lying dead just a few feet away from them. The backpack was very odd, and it could not be overlooked that Marcel was found at Anne's apartment building. They needed to locate this backpack, and to their surprise, they found it pretty easily. Inside the bag was some rope and some light-colored jeans which were wrapped around a hammer. Inside the front pocket, they found a wallet which linked to Jessica Peach. How and got everything in there without anyone seeing, or if they did, is not known. There still wasn't enough to make an arrest, so detectives placed Anne under surveillance, while a search warrant for her apartment was obtained. They also realized that before Marcel was killed, and was spotted hiding another backpack in a dumpster. This contained 2 cleavers, some more rope, a mallet, and a flashlight. There were also a load of cleaning products inside as well. It was the same hammer that was located in the harbor, and the hammer they now believed was the murder weapon. They finally got the search warrant they needed and entered her apartment, which was almost totally empty. But it didn't look like she was moving out. It just looked like she lived there with nothing in it. The apartment's superintendent, Jack, said she hadn't been there long, a matter of days in fact. He had met her on the 4th of May when she applied for one of the spaces. Her social worker had dropped off a check to pay the deposit, and Jack learned that she had just left a psychiatric care facility. When it came to moving in on the 6th of May, Jack said Anne was extremely nervous and awkward and had turned up with just 3 bags of clothes and a teddy bear. He said he felt really bad for her, so he got her some couch cushions to sleep on and a blanket to put over her window. Some of the residents chipped in to get her some toiletries too. Jack said she was very quiet and polite, and he was beyond shocked that she could be involved in something like this. In one of the rooms, they found a light-colored scarf that she was wearing on the night Marcel had died, and this had specks of blood on it. In her bathroom bin, they found something so crucial it would take Anne from being a person of interest to the only suspect in Marcel's murder. A Walmart receipt time-stamped at 10:40 p.m. on the very night she had been with Marcel and just hours before he would have been killed. The receipt showed that a purchase was made for a knife and a hammer, and, sure enough, the cameras at Walmart confirmed this. The cashiers described her as odd and her behavior unsettling. It was now the 13th of May and, unbelievably, the police that had Anne under surveillance suddenly called the station and said that she had returned to the same Walmart and was browsing the tools section again. Backup was now on the way, and everyone was worrying that there could be a risk to someone in the store. As she was waiting to pay, the police team arrived, ready to place Anne Norris under arrest for the murder of Marcel Reardon. She was soon charged with first-degree murder and didn't try to deny anything, and admitted that she had hit Marcel over the head several times that morning, but she wasn't giving anyone a reason as to why. She said she had killed him at her apartment and dragged his body under the stairs before running back into town to meet with Kevin and Jessica and, unbeknownst to them, to dispose of the evidence. Marcel's family said they couldn't believe that and had done this all by herself. Marcel was a big man, and they doubted her ability to be able to drag him and hide him herself. But police said they weren't looking for anyone else in the case, and instead it was all on her. A hearing was held to find whether there would be enough evidence to send this to trial, and it was determined that there was. Things moved quickly, and it took just 4 hours to select the jury members. The now 30-year-old's murder trial began on January 22, 2018. Despite admitting to killing him, Anne Norris pleaded not guilty, and her team was pushing for her to be found not criminally responsible. An expert testified that and had spoken to him, and he believed she had schizophrenia. He said that she had seen Marcel as a threat for some reason that night. From what she had told him, Marcel had been sat on the steps outside, possibly even falling asleep or passing out, his back to the door. Anne, who was upstairs in her apartment, got scared that Marcel was going to hurt her. She grabbed the hammer she had just bought, crept out behind him, and beat him to death. He said in her mind she was acting on some sort of preemptive self-defense, but the prosecution were pushing for a first-degree murder conviction. They said the evidence presented showed that she had clearly planned a very deliberate killing. She admitted she had kept hitting Marcel until she was sure he was dead, showing she knew she was going to kill him but continued her attack. They said he was very drunk and incapacitated, unable to fight her off or even really know what was happening until it was too late. And if it was some sort of self-defense, why hadn't she called for help after the fact and alerted someone? Instead, she hid him away and disposed of the evidence to cover her tracks. She had then continued to lie to the police in her first interview. The prosecution argued that the preemptive hiding of the murder weapon and cleaning products had to be questioned. Her father, Brian, testified that his daughter's mental health had started to decline and deteriorate after she told her parents she was going to the police about several alleged sexual assaults. Upon hearing this, it was the only time that and showed any reaction in court and burst into tears. Brian said that one night she called him, begging him to come home. When he got there, she was hysterical and all the cupboard doors in the house were open or torn off. She couldn't talk, eventually writing on a piece of paper that she had been molested. She said that she had been assaulted by one of her coaches and this had ended her future sports career. She said she had also been assaulted by her ex-boyfriend, claims he vehemently denied in court. When she reported these incidents to the police, they had big concerns about her mental health and her cases were put on hold. Her father said she had even accused him of assault. She said when she realized it wasn't true, she said, Brian said she was convinced her family were trying to poison her and that people were breaking into her room while she slept. She was later diagnosed with bipolar disorder and psychotic symptoms. While in the treatment facility just before she moved into the apartment block, professionals inside said she would go from punching walls and being aggressive to laughing and joking with them. They really didn't know what mood she was going to be in, hour to hour. Whilst and had been in the women's correctional facility in Clarenville awaiting trial, an informant had recorded a lot of their conversations. In one, and made up a rhyme, singing "Goodnight Marcel" and laughing about it. The prosecution were left disappointed when most of these recordings were actually excluded and not allowed into evidence. The judge said they didn't have any relevance and would have an excessive prejudicial impact on the jury. This was a big blow for the prosecution as they argued it was completely relevant to the case. After a month-long trial, it was now up to the jury and people really had no idea as to which way it would go. And Norris was found not criminally responsible. Marcel's brother stormed out of the courtroom as the rest of his family cried. One journalist in the courtroom said the verdict of not criminally responsible was so rare, it really did shock people as so much has to be proven for this to be the case. And alongside her own admissions, it seemed to be quite a strange verdict. Following the verdict, the board had three options for those who were found not criminally responsible: an absolute discharge, a conditional discharge, or detention with or without conditions, and was placed in psychiatric care, and it will be down to the Newfoundland and Labrador Criminal Mental Disorder Review Board's discretion as to when she is released. Less than 4 months after his testimony against Anne, Kevin O'Brien was found dead in St. John's Harbor. Police said they did not suspect any foul play, noting his addiction problems, saying they thought he likely fell in and drowned. The prosecution filed an appeal against the verdict with the Supreme Court of Newfoundland and Labrador, stating that evidence was improperly excluded from the trial. The judging panel found that whilst it was an error to exclude the evidence, it would have no effect on the jury's decision. They also upheld the decision to disallow the audio recording from inside her cell. It was ruled that there was no basis for a new trial. Still fighting at the end of 2019, the Crown then took their appeal to the highest court in the country, the Supreme Court of Canada. But again, it was dismissed right away, and the Supreme Court gave no reason as to why, and has never said what really transpired between the pair, and her defense team say she might not even ever remember. Everybody will always be left guessing. Marcel was laid to rest with his beloved mother Evelyn lying side by side. Jacqueline said she always looks at a picture that Marcel gave to her. It is of a bridge over a peaceful lake at sunrise. When he gave it to her, he said, "This should remind you that everything is water under the bridge. Just let things go." Something she tries to live by for his sake and memory, but with the feeling of no justice being served. To let it go is a bitter pill to swallow. Marcel's life had been spiraling and he was struggling to claw things back, but he was trying. His family said Marcel would have given you the shirt off his back and done anything for anyone. He wanted to get better for his family, and it is tragic to think that his life was ended before he even had a chance to make the changes he told people he so desperately wanted to. On October 8, 1988, a tragic incident occurred at 16 Woodland Way in Greenville, South Carolina. Alice Hainsworth Ryan, a lung cancer patient who had recently completed a 3-day chemotherapy session, was found deceased in her kitchen. She had sustained multiple stab wounds. The distressing discovery was made by her daughter, Catherine Stribling, who noticed a shattered window pane near the back door, indicating that something was wrong. This heart-wrenching scene raised numerous inquiries. Who could be responsible for such a horrendous act? What motivated this inhumane crime? Greenville, South Carolina, a vibrant city with a population of over 70,000 according to the 2020 census, is renowned for its rich history and thriving art scene. It is a place where the charm of the past harmonizes with modern living, offering a plethora of recreational and historical sites. The community, known for its friendliness and diversity, contributes to a lively and welcoming atmosphere. Greenville stands out for its blend of urban conveniences and natural beauty, making it an attractive destination for both residents and visitors. However, like any city, Greenville faces its share of challenges, including a crime rate that is 81.53% higher than the national average. The resolution of the Alice Hainsworth Ryan cold case serves as a reminder of the city's ongoing efforts to address these issues. Alice Hainsworth Ryan, born into a prominent family on January 24, 1908, grew up in a world of privilege and prominence in Greenville. Her upbringing on Main Street, under the care of her father, Harry J. Hainsworth, and mother, Rhoda Livingston Hainsworth, profoundly influenced her life. Alice had an extensive network of connections. She was the sister of mill owner H.J. Hainsworth Jr. and had ties to notable figures such as Judge Clement Hainsworth and Greenville's Mayor Knox White. At the age of 80, Alice was a widow after her husband, Joseph Murray Ryan, passed away in 1950 when she was only 42 years old. Despite this loss, she remained a central figure in Greenville society, navigating much of her life alone. Alice's life was deeply intertwined with the city's history, as she had spent her entire married life in the Grand Woodland Way home near Cleveland Park. This was the very place where her life came to a tragic end. A mother of 3, Alice was known for her active participation in social events. She was a familiar face at civic gatherings, an alumna of Converse College and a member of the Greenville Country Club. Despite her affluent lifestyle, she preferred simplicity in her home life. Surprisingly, she opted not to have air conditioning installed, a decision that occasionally concerned her family, who also worried about the lack of security systems. However, those who were acquainted with her described her as a fearless individual. In late 1987, Alice was confronted with a new challenge, a diagnosis of lung cancer following a battle with pneumonia. She fought bravely against the illness until her unfortunate passing, enduring chemotherapy and its toll on her health. Her life, filled with connections and history, came to a tragic end in the place she had called home for so many years, leaving the community in shock and her family grappling with a profound loss. On that fateful Saturday, on October 8, 1988, Greenville experienced a clear sky, a departure from the usual humid haze of the southern summer. For 80-year-old Alice Ryan, this day brought a sense of relief as she left St. Francis Hospital after a challenging 2-night stay for her chemotherapy. Little did anyone know that it would be her final day. Alice's daughter, Catherine Stribling, had a routine plan for the day. She dropped her mother off at home around 2 p.m. after the hospital visit and then went out to get lunch for both of them. However, upon her return at 3:10 p.m., she was met with a disturbing sight. As she approached the back door of her mother's house, she noticed something alarming. The pane near the doorknob was shattered. Puzzled and perhaps a bit anxious, Catherine inserted her key and opened the door without even checking if it was locked. The scene that awaited her in the kitchen was both horrifying and surreal. The stillness of the room was broken by the sight of Alice, Catherine's mother, lying motionless on the floor. The peaceful atmosphere of their home was shattered, much like the broken window. Catherine's gaze was immediately drawn to the white silk turban, now stained with blood and a few feet away from her mother, leaving her bald head exposed, a stark reminder of her battle with cancer. Adding to the horror, Alice's brown trousers remained undisturbed while her pink turtleneck and brown sweater were in disarray, revealing numerous dark, ominous wounds on her abdomen. What started as a tranquil morning had quickly turned into a nightmare. The calmness of a mother returning home after treatment was brutally disrupted by a violent act, plunging a family into mourning and a community into disbelief. The discovery of Alice Hainsworth Ryan's lifeless body was not only a heartbreaking moment for her loved ones, but also a shocking event for the entire Greenville community. It marked the beginning of a perplexing unsolved case, a cold mystery that would haunt the city for years to come. The finding of Alice Hainsworth Ryan's body in her Greenville residence triggered a thorough and intense investigation by the local authorities. Upon arrival, the police immediately began probing into the details of this heinous crime. A crucial lead emerged when a black and yellow-handled flathead screwdriver, suspected to be the murder weapon, was located in a nearby ravine, close to where an abandoned car was also discovered. Intriguingly, the screwdriver yielded no fingerprints, complicating the investigative process. Furthermore, a blood-stained dish towel, similar to others found in Mrs. Ryan's kitchen, was unearthed, adding another layer of mystery to the case. The autopsy findings painted a grim picture. Alice Ryan, already weakened by her chemotherapy, displayed no signs of defensive wounds. There were no traces of hair or skin under her fingernails, indicating she had not put up a fight. She had succumbed to 4 fatal stab wounds to her back and abdomen, yet her body bore a total of 37 stab wounds. The brutality of the attack left the community reeling in shock and fear. The murder caused a sense of unease to spread throughout the neighborhood, prompting residents to take extra precautions. There was a sudden increase in calls to burglar alarm companies, as people became more vigilant about strangers and made it a routine to double-check locked doors. Crucial eyewitness account came from a 16-year-old girl who lived half a mile away from Mrs. Ryan's house. She attended Christchurch Episcopal School and reported seeing a white car speeding in reverse down Mrs. Ryan's driveway around the time of the murder. The car in police custody was recognized by her as the one she had almost collided with. Although she couldn't provide a detailed description of the driver, she remembered noticing dark hair. The investigation into Alice Ryan's murder became one of the largest in Greenville's history. The Greenville Police Department, along with state law enforcement division agents and an FBI agent, worked tirelessly on the case. They meticulously created a detailed profile of the potential perpetrator and interviewed approximately 300 individuals, including around 60 potential suspects. The evidence collected was extensive, consisting of 2 large cardboard boxes filled with incident reports, tape recordings, interview notes, and crime scene photos. The investigators were well aware of Alice Ryan's high-profile status as the widow of a wealthy textile executive and a member of one of Greenville's most prominent legal families. Additionally, Alice's family publicly offered a $10,000 reward for anyone who could provide information leading to the killer's identification. Despite the extensive investigation and pursued leads, every avenue explored ultimately reached a dead end. The case eventually went cold for several decades. However, in 2017, a breakthrough occurred, offering a glimmer of hope in the long-standing mystery surrounding the chilling murder of Alice Hainsworth Ryan. The persistence of the investigators led them to re-examine the evidence using fresh eyes and advanced technology. Their dedication paid off when they uncovered DNA evidence on one of the items initially gathered from the crime scene. This vital piece of evidence, belonging to an African-American male, had been carefully preserved over the years, awaiting advancements in forensic science. In November of 2017, the investigators submitted this DNA sample to the Combined DNA Index System. The relentless efforts of the law enforcement team were finally rewarded when they received notification of a match in the Combined DNA Index System database to a DNA profile. This was the breakthrough they had been eagerly anticipating, a major lead in a case that had remained unsolved for almost 30 years. The DNA profile led them to a 50-year-old man residing in Americus, Georgia. Further investigations and DNA testing confirmed his identity as Brian Keith Munns. This discovery marked a significant turning point in the investigation, transforming it from a cold case to a case with a concrete suspect. Born in 1968, Brian Keith Munns had a background that was largely unknown in terms of family details. However, his criminal record painted a troubling picture. In 1998, Munns faced charges for first-degree criminal sexual conduct. He ultimately pleaded guilty in 2001, resulting in a period of imprisonment that lasted until May of 2007. Upon his release, he was placed on probation, but this period of relative freedom was short-lived. Munns found himself back in prison in August of 2008 after his community supervision was revoked. Released on probation again in May of 2009, his freedom was once again short-lived. He violated the terms of his release by failing to register as a sex offender, leading to his community supervision being revoked once more in July of 2009. Munns completed his sentence and was released in October of 2009. This pattern of incarceration and release, coupled with the severity of his crimes, highlights a troubled history. On May 6, 2019, the Greenville Police Department made a significant announcement. Brian Keith Munns, who was 51 years old at the time and lived in Americus, Georgia, was apprehended in connection with the long-standing murder case of Alice Hainsworth Ryan. Greenville Police Chief Ken Miller disclosed that Munns had been taken into custody on February 15th, but this information was deliberately withheld to allow for further probing and interviews. Chief Miller justified the delayed announcement by stating that premature disclosure of Munns's arrest could have compromised the investigation, potentially impeding detectives' efforts to validate witness testimonies and gather more evidence. Subsequent to Munns's apprehension, detectives conducted an additional 30 interviews, which played a pivotal role in reconstructing the events leading to Ryan's demise. Notably, one of these interviews, provided by an acquaintance of Munns, offered detailed insights into the crime, shedding light on Munns's entry into Ryan's residence, the nature of the inflicted injuries, the chronological sequence of events. This crucial information led to the filing of supplementary charges against Munns, the culmination of a meticulous 29-month reinvestigation involving the Cold Case Unit, active detectives, and a state law enforcement division agent resulted in Munns' arrest. Chief Miller commended the dedication and hard work of all parties involved, including prosecutors who ensured that the case was handled in a manner conducive to successful prosecution. However, a new development emerged following Munns's arrest. He confessed to being present in Ryan's vehicle with Lamar Green on the day of the murder. Munns shifted the blame onto Green, alleging that Green was the one responsible for Ryan's death and attempted to sell him the car afterward. Interestingly, Lamar Green had been a suspect from the outset, but was killed in an incident deemed justifiable homicide, effectively closing his chapter in the investigation. Despite the initial charges, Munns eventually pleaded guilty to the offense of failing to report the crime to law enforcement. In September 2021, he received a 4-year sentence with credit for time served, and the remaining charges were dismissed. After a prolonged period of uncertainty and sorrow, Alice Hainsworth Ryan's family was able to find some semblance of closure regarding her tragic passing. In her own bedroom, a woman was discovered dead. Her 2 sons, who shared the same home, saw and heard nothing. Detectives began their investigation, but they were unable to identify the offender. No one was ready for the truth that came to light, even though it took 38 years for the case to make progress. Linda Slayton was born in 1950 in Alabama, United States. She was raised by devoted parents and had a younger sister named Judy. Linda was kind-hearted and ambitious from a young age. She made a lot of friends by constantly attempting to assist others. She later wed Frank, and the 2 of them had 2 sons, Jeff and Tim. But as time passed, their marriage grew more and more troubled. Frank began abusing his wife and kids after becoming addicted to alcohol. Linda ultimately made the decision to relocate to Florida with her sons. They made their home in Lakeland, where Linda's sister and parents were already residing. Setting aside all of her time to support her sons, Linda rented a home in a lakeside community. Linda worked at a number of jobs, but she was never wealthy. She occasionally had to sell her possessions in order to pay her bills. Because she could not even afford a car, Jeff, her older son, had to commute by bicycle. Tim, her younger son, was a football player and frequently had to ask his coach for a lift home from practice in order to avoid having to walk. Linda made it her mission to spend as much time and energy as possible with her sons, even in the face of financial hardship. She tried to make sure their childhood was full of happy memories by taking them on walks, taking them to concerts of their favorite bands, and so on. When Linda was 31 years old, on September 3, 1981, in the evening, she waited for Tim to get done with his practice before accompanying him to the neighbor's small family celebration. When Jeff got home, he wanted to have dinner, but the refrigerator was empty. After becoming enraged with his mother, he rode his bicycle to his grandparents' residence on the opposite side of town. After the entire family got home, Jeff got into a fight with his mother about the empty refrigerator. But in the end, they said goodnight to one another and went to bed. The next morning, Linda received a visit from her sister, who also lived in the same complex, inviting her over for coffee. When she knocked on the door, nobody answered. Thinking Linda had gone somewhere, the woman turned around to leave when she noticed the bedroom window was open. When she went to look inside, she saw Linda lying on the other side of the bed. The woman screamed and ran to the neighbors to report what she had seen immediately. She only needed to take one glance at her sister's face to know that she was dead. When detectives got to their home, they started looking over the scene of the crime. With a wire hanger around her neck and her clothes half down, Linda lay on her bed. Based on the evidence, the police surmised that the victim had been attacked and strangled by an unidentified man who had entered her room. Soon after, forensic specialists discovered a palm print on the windowsill supporting this theory. Since the apartment lacked air conditioning, Linda frequently left it open, which allowed the murderer easy access. The victim's oldest son woke up from all the noise while the detectives were at the crime scene. After escorting him outside, the detectives broke the devastating news of his mother's passing. They woke up his younger brother later and escorted him out. But as the boy was passing by his mother's room, a second policeman came out, and Tim saw his mother's body through the open door. He instantly froze, and the officer had to pull him away. Tim, who was 12, and Jeff, who was 15, were completely shocked. At first, they were unable to accept their mother's death. When the investigators were able to speak with the brother later, he said they had not heard anything or even woken up that night. The detectives thought this was odd, even though they had their own rooms. Given the brutality of the murder and the excellent acoustics of the building, loud noises ought to have been audible from the victim's room. The neighbors were questioned by the police, but they had also heard nothing. That day, none of the complex's occupants had seen any suspicious people. After examining the victim's body, medical professionals concluded that she had been abused, although they were able to remove the murderer's biological material. DNA analysis was not yet possible. The experts verified that Linda's death was due to strangulation. Therefore, the investigators were left with very little evidence to work with. They could only benefit from the palm print if they could locate a suspect and compare them. Linda's sons went to live with their grandparents. They continued to live in shock and continual fear of being pursued by the unidentified killer. Because of the extreme fear, their grandfather sat with a rifle in the living room while they slept in the same room as their grandmother. The investigators thought the kids were not in danger, though. They believed that the killer had to have known the victim and that the crime was motivated only by sexual desire. Following their conversation with Linda's family, they discovered that her ex-husband had a violent past. He was the top suspect right away, but the police soon discovered that the man was not there when the murder happened. Investigators later learned that Linda had begun dating a particular man not long before she passed away. They were able to track him down, but he also had a strong alibi. The fingerprints of all the victim's neighbors were compared by the detectives with the sample found on the windowsill. They then tried the same procedure on all the men who had previously been found guilty living in Lakeland, but they were unable to find any matches. After Linda's sons began to heal over several weeks following the murder, their family finally concluded that sending them back to school would be the best course of action. It did eventually assist the brothers, as they started talking to friends once more and eventually resumed a regular life. Tim returned to the football team because his mother had always been pleased with his achievements. He put a picture of his team in his bedroom, a month after she passed away, as a memento of how his mother had inspired him to pursue his dreams. In the meantime, the detectives were unable to identify a viable suspect and came to a standstill. They made the decision to start over and reevaluate why the sons had not heard any screams or indications of a struggle. After going over Jeff's statements, the police discovered that on the day Linda was killed, he got into a fight with her. The teenager himself added that he and his mother had verbal arguments on a regular basis. This led the investigators to wonder if Jeff had murdered his mother. They summoned him in for questioning and once more posed a variety of queries. Jeff quickly learned that he was under suspicion from the investigators for the crime. The detectives persisted in their pressure even after he denied any involvement. Jeff accepted their offer to take a polygraph exam. Although the polygraph operator did not find any evidence of deceit, the police were not willing to give up. Not too long after, they summoned him back for interrogation and even made arrangements to have him hypnotized. Jeff was under constant pressure, and the investigators even accused him of killing his mother by strangulation. The family of Linda reached a breaking point as a result, and they forbade the police from speaking to Jeff, and insisted that they concentrate on finding the true murderer. Jeff consented to take another polygraph test in spite of this, and after receiving positive results, he was at last written off as a suspect. After that, the case did not move forward for a long time. Tim and Jeff grew up, gained employment, and began their own families. Their mother's murder continued to haunt them, but each time they reached out to the investigators, they were met with the same response. Nothing had changed in the case. Scientists took a DNA sample from the biological material on the victim's body in March 1999. When a new detective was brought on to the case 2 years later, he compared it with samples from every suspect, including Linda's 2 sons, but there were no matches. There were no results even when it was compared to the FBI database. When Jeff first met this detective, he found out that he had known him for a long time. It turned out that the men and their mutual friends went bowling together on a regular basis. When they spoke, the investigator assured Jeff that he would do everything in his power to solve the case. Tim and Jeff learned of another unsolved crime that had been going on for a long time around the same period. Following extensive media coverage, fresh information surfaced that helped apprehend the offender. At that point, the brothers made the decision to talk to reporters about their family's tragedy. They conducted a thorough interview, and the local newspapers published the story. The detective received an intriguing lead in September of 2001. He discovered that a year after Linda's murder, a man by the name of Jimmy Ulmer had kidnapped a young woman through her bedroom window. He was sentenced to 80 years in prison for this crime. The fact that this individual resided in the same apartment building as Linda, only a short distance from her home, added to the intrigue at the time of her murder. Since it was non-existent at the time of Ulmer's arrest, criminals' DNA had not yet been added to a shared database. The man himself died in 1996, and no biological samples remained. But when the investigator got in touch with the offender's mother, she gave some personal items from which the specialists were able to remove the sample. Sadly, the results did not match the killer's DNA, but the investigator was not about to give up. He kept in touch with Linda's sons, kept looking for new suspects, and repeatedly asked the FBI to check the killer's DNA sample against every database they could find. Sadly, he had health issues in 2015, which made him retire even though he had promised to see the case through to the end. Jeff and Tim had been so close to accepting that their mother's killer would never be found by then. But when Cease Moore, a well-known genetic genealogy specialist, took up the case in 2019, new hope materialized. She obtained the murderer's DNA sample, uploaded it to open databases, and started looking for matches. Usually, these databases can even assist in locating the DNA owner's most distant relatives, who may reside in different regions of the globe and be completely unaware of one another. By using this information, one can follow their family tree, look for shared ancestors, eliminate thousands of relatives, and determine who the DNA owner is. Moore was able to identify one family that was residing in the area at the time of the murder. After carrying out all of this intensive investigation, she came to the conclusion that the only member of that family who met all the criteria was the one who was most likely the murderer. He was someone the detectives had come across in previous reports as soon as they heard his name. The man was Tim's football coach, Joseph Clinton Mills, and he would often give him a lift home after practice. Although he had never been on the list of suspects in 1981, he had given a statement over the phone to the police after dropping Tim off at home that day. The idea that Mills might be the murderer was not even entertained by any of the detectives. Since he was only 20 years old and there was no evidence at all against him at the time, the police did not compare his fingerprints and DNA to samples that were discovered at the crime scene. The investigators made the decision to withhold this discovery's disclosure from Jeff and Tim. They had to confirm that Mills was actually responsible for their mother's murder first. After reading his biography, they discovered that Mills was detained in 1984 on suspicion of forging a will. His fingerprints were obtained, and they are still preserved in a paper archive. After comparing them to the victim's windowsill fingerprints, experts discovered a perfect match. They eventually found out who the likely murderer was 38 years later. The detectives proceeded to the last phase as soon as this information was discovered, requesting a DNA sample from Mills so they could compare it with the biological material taken from the victim's body. They found out the man was still residing in the same home as he had in 1981. At this point, Mills was 58 years old, married, had a small business, and children and grandchildren. For several weeks, the detectives kept an eye on him in the hopes of obtaining something that had his DNA. It might have been a bottle, a coffee cup, a cigarette butt, or anything else. But since they were never given the chance, the cops made the covert decision to take his trash. They gave the bag to the lab, where professionals quickly found an object that matched his DNA. The results came back quickly. Mills' DNA exactly matched the sample that was discovered on Linda's body. Following that, the detectives met with Linda's sons to update them on the investigation status. While they were both taken aback, Tim found it more difficult to accept. He was shocked to learn that his football coach was the same monster that had murdered his mother. In addition to the fact that Tim looked up to and respected him, Mills still gave him rides home from practice after the murder. The man gave him unceasing encouragement and inquired about any updates regarding his mother's case. For a long time, Tim's old bedroom featured a picture of his football team, with the monster that killed his mother standing right behind them. When Mills was arrested that same year, he handled himself calmly and did not even inquire as to the nature of his charges. Upon being interrogated and questioned about Linda's murder, he denied any involvement. He said he dropped him off and headed out. Mills claimed he had never been inside their home, but the investigators knew this was untrue. The suspect abruptly altered his account of what happened after they told him about the DNA and fingerprint match. According to Mills, Linda asked him to sneak into her bedroom through the window that evening for a private conversation. She then requested that he give her a light hanger choke. But Mills misjudged his strength and killed her. The investigators, understandably, were skeptical of this account at first. In light of all the available data, their theory was far more likely to be correct. Mills had seen Tim's mother on multiple occasions and could have targeted her as a victim. He dropped the boy off on the night of the murder, and the boy went straight to a neighbor's house with his mother for a party. Mills drove a distance away from their house, taking advantage of the fact that no one would be home. And then he returned on foot, breaking through Linda's bedroom window and hiding in the closet. He waited for everyone to go to sleep for several hours. He took a wire hanger out of that same closet and used it as a murder weapon. He violently attacked the victim before exiting the house through the window. Mills was charged with the murder, and the case was sent to court based on all the evidence that was available. For this kind of offense, Mills could have received the death penalty in the state of Florida. However, on February 9, 2022, he made the decision to reach a settlement with the prosecution in order to avoid this outcome. He admitted to the murder, but he was exempt from sharing the specifics of the crime under the terms of the agreement. This fact did not sit well with Linda's sons. Tim yelled at his coach in the courtroom, demanding to know why he had taken his mother away from him. But the man just stared down and said nothing. When given the chance to make a closing statement, Mills only said, "I am a good person. I am not who they are trying to portray me as." Even though this infuriated the brothers even more, in the end, they were appreciative of the investigators for solving the case and identifying the murderer. Mills received a life sentence without the chance of release. Following the verdict's announcement, Jeff and Tim pledged to live moral lives and devote themselves to their families because they knew their mother would have approved of it. Marlena Danielle Childress was born February 17, 1983 to Pamela and Kevin. Her parents would eventually divorce, and in 1987, 4-year-old Marlena lived in Union City, Tennessee with her mother, Pam Bailey, her stepfather, Johnny Bailey, and 4-month-old half-brother, Damon. On April 16, 1987, Pam had taken Marlena and her stepson, Jerry, to a nearby store to buy candy. While they were there, Jerry and the store owner recalled seeing a man speaking to Marlena while standing outside a red car with a McCracken County, Kentucky license plate. Then about 3 p.m., Marlena was playing in the yard of her home and her mother stated she heard a car slam on the brakes, and when she looked out of the window, she claimed to see the same 2-door older red car speeding away with the McCracken County, Kentucky license plate. She said when she went to check on Marlena, she was gone and then reported her missing. The man that was seen talking to Marlena earlier in the afternoon at the nearby store was soon tracked down, but was ruled out as a suspect. This put Bailey's claims into question. Marlena's biological father and her stepfather were also cleared of any involvement. Bailey then checked herself into a local hospital for several days, complaining of exhaustion. 2 months after Marlena's disappearance, her mother told investigators that she had hit Marlena while trying to discipline her and had unintentionally killed her. She told a private investigator hired by Bailey's family that Marlena was misbehaving, so she turned around and slapped her so hard that she fell over and hit her head on a table. She said she then placed Marlena's body in her truck and drove to the nearby town of Martin. She also said that she found a family friend named P.L. Summers for assistance, and he met her at a bridge on Campground Road where they both proceeded to throw her body into the North Fork of the Obion River. Even though a search of the river turned up no trace of Marlena, a bone and a stained cloth were found about 4 miles downstream from where Pam claimed to have dumped the body. These items were then sent to Nashville for testing, but it's unclear what the results were. Pam was ultimately charged with second-degree murder. When Summers was questioned by police, he denied any involvement, saying he knew Bailey but hadn't even seen her in 2 years. He also had a solid alibi for the day Marlena disappeared and was never charged in connection with her disappearance. Though months later, Summers would be arrested on an unrelated charge of fondling a 9-year-old boy in his backyard. Bailey recanted her confession shortly afterwards, stating she had made up the story because she was emotionally distressed, taking medication for depression, and had been psychologically coerced. Instead of implicating Summers as her accomplice, now claimed that he had sexually abused her as a child, and when he stopped by her house and she resisted his sexual advances, he retaliated by kidnapping Marlena. Bailey made several more conflicting statements about her daughter's disappearance. At one point, she said she had sold Marlena to pay off a drug debt. After she was charged with Marlena's murder, she was given a court-ordered psychological evaluation at a mental institution, and they deemed her mentally fit to stand trial. The case went to a grand jury, but with nobody or any other evidence against Pam, they decided not to indict her for Marlena's death, and she remained free. In May of 1989, a report of child neglect was filed against a home in Anniston, Alabama in the months following Marlena's disappearance. The family that lived in the home had the surname Childress, but they weren't related to Marlena. 10 children were discovered in the home when a social worker visited, and one of them was a young girl that called herself Marlena Childress, but the adults strangely called her by a different name. The social worker later realized the girl resembled a missing girl in a flyer she had seen with the same name and the same silver-capped front teeth. When the social worker returned a day or two later, the family had already moved away. 2 weeks later, they were located in Florida, but the girl was not with them. Neighbors also reported seeing her with the family, but the sightings were never confirmed. The family had a history of harboring other people's children. Once in Florida, the father was later arrested on sexually abusing 2 of his children. After Marlena's disappearance, quickly moved to Mayfield, Kentucky to live with her parents and had another son named Casey. On April 22, 2002, 6 days after the 15-year anniversary of Marlena's disappearance, Bailey told Casey, who was now 12 years old, that she had a surprise for him and he needed to be home at 7:30. She had him get into the car and drove him 3 miles to the Arnett Cemetery while he was blindfolded with a blue handkerchief. Pam would then lead Casey to a cemetery marker with the word son inscribed on it and had him sit down next to it. She then stabbed him 3 times in the neck and shoulder. Thankfully, Casey was able to escape to a nearby house where Russell Legions lived, then drove by the Legions' house a few times. Casey told Russell his mother tried to kill him and he didn't know why. Casey also said his mother told him he was partially responsible for her getting a divorce because of his attitude. Pamela and Casey's father, Johnny Bailey, were living together at the time of the incident and no divorce papers had been filed. Pamela was arrested hours later at a gas station in Nortonville, 70 miles away. Casey was released from the hospital the next day to the custody of his father. When Pam was arrested, she claimed that she completely blacked out and had no memory of stabbing her son. She was then charged with attempted murder, but ultimately wound up pleading no contest to second-degree assault. She received a 10-year prison sentence and has since been released. This incident prompted police to reopen the investigation into Marlena's disappearance, but she has still never been found. Bailey and Johnny did actually get divorced, but he still lobbied for his ex-wife's early release in 2004, claiming that Casey was no longer afraid of his mother and he would have had no problem having her around his children. Marlena has never been found, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Mansfield, a fascinating and historic market town in Nottinghamshire in the UK. With gorgeous architecture and a remarkable history, there really is plenty to do and see here. One of the people that called this place home was 18-year-old Liam Gray. Liam had been born into a loving family and was one of 4 children, having 3 siblings, Paige, Madison, and Freddie. Liam was popular and well-loved by those who knew him, with his mother Jo and describing him as happy-go-lucky. He loved to make people laugh and have fun, never taking himself too seriously. He was a passionate supporter of his beloved Liverpool Football Club, and one of his former teachers said he had a heart of gold and always looked out for and cared for other people. He was also close to his grandfather John, affectionately known as Pops, and Liam would move in with him when he was in his teens, after having a tough time at school. He had a close group of friends and an especially close bond with Reese, his best friend. The pair were as close as brothers and spent most of their time together, with Madison calling them inseparable. They had grown up together and gone to the same schools, and their friendship had gone from strength to strength. Reese lived across the road from Liam and Pops, and Reese was equally close to Pops, saying he would be lost without him. Liam and his grandfather lived on Gladstone Street, and after moving, Liam introduced Reese to one of his other friends, Jonathan Treadgold. 17-year-old Jonathan's early life had been troubled and he had spent various times in the care of social services, following drug use and domestic violence in the family home. He was also having run-ins with the law from the age of 14, with a criminal record including threatening behavior and criminal damage. Liam, being the caring young man he was, decided to take Jonathan under his wing and try and be there for him as a friend and a support system. He recognized that Jonathan had various struggles and wanted to help him turn his life around. Joan wasn't too sure though. She said there was just something about Jonathan that bothered her, and she wasn't keen on her son hanging around with him. Liam's sister had also heard things about Jonathan and his behavior, but she was prepared to put that aside, give him a chance and judge for herself what he was like. Liam invited Jonathan to hang out with him, on one occasion asking him if he wanted to go to a family party at Joanne's house. Jonathan had far too much to drink and became more and more angry and volatile, culminating in him assaulting someone. Liam was still determined to be there for Jonathan and showcase the same deep loyalty that he showed to all his friends. When he was 17, got news that changed everything. His partner was expecting a baby. Liam was elated, excited to become a father and throw himself into the challenges and joys of parenthood that awaited him. Reese said that Liam was over the moon. With impending fatherhood, Liam continued to mature, and knowing that it was going to be a monumental change in his life, he began to see his friends less as he prepared to meet his new baby. On the 18th of July, 2019, Liam and his partner of 3 years welcomed their first child, a baby girl. Life was good and Liam was happy. August 1st, 2019, it was a bright and beautiful summer's day in Mansfield. On the August 2nd, Liam and his partner were moving to Birmingham with their baby to start their next chapter as a family. Whilst his family were going to miss him and were sad he was moving away, they supported him and he was ready to take the leap. He decided to spend his last day in Mansfield with his 2 closest friends. Liam, Jonathan, and Reese were seen going into a local shop to purchase alcohol before going back to Pop's house on Gladstone Street. They sat in the garden and drank and filmed a series of Snapchat videos whilst there. Liam asked Jonathan if he was going to change out of his tracksuit bottoms to make himself look a bit smarter, as he wasn't yet 18 and he didn't want him to draw attention to himself. Liam said he could wear a pair of his jeans if he wanted to, and after Jonathan got changed, the 3 of them headed off to a nearby pub. As they were walking through the park, received a message. It was from Jonathan's sister's boyfriend, the contents of which are not clear, but it sparked an argument. Reese showed the message to the other 2, and Liam claimed he would hit the male who had sent the message in an attempt to stick up for Jonathan's sister. Jonathan grew incredibly angry, and the argument continued to escalate. As the situation got worse, Liam told him if he was going to keep behaving like that, he needed to go away and leave the jeans back at the house. After Jonathan had gone, Liam wanted to try and de-escalate the situation and not have his last day ruined. So they agreed to go back to the house to get Jonathan and try and salvage the rest of the day. When Jonathan arrived at the house, Pops was there in the living room. Liam and Reese got back just 4 minutes later, and Liam was keen to try and resolve the argument. Reese waited outside. Roughly a minute later, Jonathan came running out of the house, telling Reese, "I've stabbed him." Jonathan then ran away. Reese immediately went inside, unsure as to whether or not it was all just hot air, or if he had actually hurt Liam. When Reese went inside, he found Liam in the dining room. He was bleeding profusely from his chest and holding tea towels there to try and stop it before asking for the emergency services. Reese called 999 and then gave the phone to Pops for him to talk to the operator. Liam then fell to the floor and Pops tried his best to help him and administer aid, putting pressure on the wound to try and stop the bleed. When the paramedics arrived on scene, Reese ran out to meet them. They tried to stabilize him as much as possible and treat his injuries. The police were also dispatched, and when they got there, they put Reese into the back of their car. The news soon made it to Joe and that Pop's house had the emergency services outside and that Liam had been stabbed by Jonathan. Superintendent Kevin Broadhead would dispatch more officers as they needed to find Jonathan and find him quickly. They would soon get some important information. The police received a call from the owner of a local sandwich shop saying that Jonathan was climbing over the wall at the back of the shop. He told the owner that he had been involved in a serious incident and had acted in self-defense, lifting up his shirt and appearing to show injuries. The police immediately linked it to the stabbing of Liam and sent more officers over there to arrest Jonathan. At 3:15 p.m., Joanne and one of Liam's sisters arrived at the house on Gladstone Street. The crew were still there and still battling to save him. They'd had to cut his chest open and manually keep his heart going. The paramedics decided against taking him to hospital in the air ambulance, as this would have meant they could not work on him whilst in the air. So the decision was made to transport him to the hospital by road. Liam was then put into the back of the ambulance and Joanne was taken to see him by an officer. She told him that she loved him as her beloved son fought for his life. He was then rushed to Queen's Medical Center in Nottingham. The police were still hunting for Jonathan Treadgold, who had run away from the sandwich shop. But then, another call came in. Person said he was at a house in Moundsfield where his mother was visiting a friend. He had told his mother and her friend that he had stabbed Liam and that Liam was dead. The arrest was caught on the police's body cam footage at 3:33 p.m. He told the officers that Liam had been the one to instigate it and had tried to stab him and that he had acted in self-defense. He was arrested on suspicion of causing grievous bodily harm. Several hours after his arrest, he was breathalyzed, and even after the time that had passed, his blood alcohol level was still 3 times the legal drink-drive limit, so he had clearly consumed a significant amount of alcohol. After getting to the hospital, Liam was taken straight into open-heart surgery to try and save him. Despite the best efforts of the medical staff, and after an hour and a half of trying to keep him alive, Liam succumbed to his injuries and died. Liam's sister Paige would later say, "I just remember a doctor walking in with 2 nurses, and I knew then from the look on the doctor's face that Liam had passed. She ran out of the room and had a panic attack. Joanne said she knew in that moment too that he had gone and that her heart shattered. She tried to call her other daughter Madison, who initially didn't answer. When she answered the second call, she said it felt like a piece of her was now gone too. Madison collapsed, unable to process what was happening. Those in the community could not believe it and were in total shock, and many people shared tributes to him, talking about how he had impacted their lives and just how much he was going to be missed. Joanne thanked the local community for all of their support and love, saying, "A post-mortem revealed that Liam had no defensive wounds, and the pathologist determined that it had been a jabbing motion when he had been stabbed. The knife had pierced his heart." Despite initially being arrested on suspicion of grievous bodily harm, this was now a murder inquiry. The police began to go through the CCTV footage to piece together the events of that day and try and work out how this had all come to be. They watched the footage of them going into the shop and buying the alcohol. Nothing seemed unusual and everything looked fine. They were then caught walking down the road before stopping in the park. The park was not covered by CCTV cameras. In his interviews, Jonathan said he had fled the park in a hurry after the argument had broken out in order to get away from Liam. But the footage showed him walking and not running. Liam and Reese were seen on CCTV walking back too. Jonathan was interviewed again, where he now said although he had picked the knife up, he had done so in self-defense and that he had been waving it around to scare him off, and this was how Liam had been stabbed. But based on what Pops had seen when he witnessed the attack and what was known about Jonathan's past, including a conviction 6 weeks prior for assaulting his girlfriend, his version of events just was not stacking up. The CCTV footage showed Jonathan running from Gladstone Street just 1 minute after Liam had gone into the house. When police searched the house, they found the knife in the kitchen, covered in Liam's blood and Jonathan's fingerprints. Jonathan also alleged in his interviews that Liam had bullied and picked on him for years and showed scars on his body, saying Liam had caused them. But the investigation would reveal the truth. The police investigating Liam's death trawled through the various records of social services, and they determined that the healed scars on Jonathan's body had not been caused by Liam but were instead self-inflicted. There was nothing to substantiate his claims that Liam had bullied him or treated him badly. Superintendent Kevin Broadhead said he believed that Jonathan was jealous of Liam starting a new life with his family in Birmingham and beginning an exciting chapter, when his own life was so chaotic. Based on all of the evidence they had gathered, Jonathan Treadgold was charged with murder. On the 18th of August, a fundraising event was held to generate funds to pay for a funeral for Liam, raise money for his newborn baby, and donate to a charity tackling knife crime. A GoFundMe was also set up. When his funeral was held, hundreds of mourners lined the streets as his coffin, draped in a Liverpool Football Club flag, was taken into St. Peter and St. Paul's Church. Those following the coffin wore shirts with a photograph of Liam on them, with "Always loved, never forgotten, forever missed" written on them too. Liam's devastated grandfather, who had tried to save his life, paid tribute to him. "Liam, I'm missing you terribly. I tried so much to help you, and I lived that day every day. My best was not good enough, and I am so sorry. I hope you are happy with the angels. Love you forever." The reverend conducting the service told those in attendance, "We need to go away not remembering the manner of Liam's death and the tragedy that it is, but remember the gift of life he was to each and every one of you here. And we go away with the message, bin the knife. We want young people to grow up safe, to not have their lives taken or destroyed." The funeral was a reflection of just how loved Liam was, how much of an impact he had on those he knew. Because he was 17 when the stabbing took place, Jonathan Treadgold was tried as a child, something that greatly upset Joanne. On the 1st of November, he appeared in court and entered a plea of not guilty to the charge of murder. He was told his trial would begin the following year. Because of his not guilty plea, the defense requested a second postmortem to be carried out on Liam's body. Joanne said it was disgraceful that he was putting Liam's family through yet more pain and devastation with his not guilty plea. Also, due to his age, there was initially a ban on his name and identity being reported. The Mansfield Chad newspaper made an application for the restrictions to be lifted, and the judge remarked, and with that, Jonathan Treadgold was unmasked and named in the press. Throughout the trial, Liam's family wore shirts with his face on it, showing that no matter how painful it was going to be, they were going to be there for him and his memory. During the proceedings, Jonathan was disrespectful and disruptive in court. He wouldn't take to the stand, he wouldn't speak, and he would not give any reason as to why he had stabbed Liam, someone who had been a good and loyal friend, and really looked after him. Paige said that she could tell from the look on his face that he wasn't sorry for what he had done at all. The evidence put before the court painted a devastating picture. A young man, a new father, about to start a new chapter in his life, taken in a violent and disturbing attack. February 7th, 2020. The jury returned their verdict. Jonathan Treadgold was unanimously found guilty and showed no emotion as the verdict was given. All he said was sound. Shouts of yes could be heard from the public gallery as Liam's family were elated that he had been convicted of his murder. Outside the courts, Joanne read a statement on behalf of the family. We will never see Liam again, hear his laugh, or see our phones flash with an incoming call from him. He was stolen from our lives. We'd like to thank everyone who tried to help and save Liam, and we appreciate everything they did. Monday, the 10th of February, 2020. At Nottingham Crown Court, Jonathan Treadgold was sentenced to a minimum of 16 years in prison for the murder of Liam Gray. Just as Gregory Dixon said, this was done in anger, drink, and spite, not in fear. The judge added that he could serve longer than 16 years, as it would be for the parole board to determine whether or not he was safe to be released, and if they deemed that he wasn't, then he would stay in custody. Following his sentencing, Joanne said, I don't think it's long enough, but there's not much more to say. The murder of Liam Gray was a senseless, tragic, and brutal one. Paige said she reminds his daughter of him every day, adding that she gets her personality from Liam. As she continues to grow up surrounded by the love of her family, the legacy of her beloved father will continue to live on through her. The tragedy of this case is best summed up by the words of his mother, Joanne. There are so many things that Liam never got to do. He hadn't learned to drive, been to college, got a stable job, got married, bought a house, or had the chance to parent his daughter and watch her grow up. We as a family have been robbed of watching him do all that too. Laura Ann Huizar was born on the 10th of May, 1972 to Judy Marie Huizar and Jose Luis Huizar. She was a 6th grader at Chester Moore Elementary School and was just 11 years old when she was kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and then brutally killed. Laura vanished on a Sunday afternoon at around 1:30 p.m. on November 6, 1983, as she was making her way home from a friend's house in St. Lucie County, Central Florida. She was last seen at 2G's Market. She had been sleeping over at a friend's house and was walking home with an armful of clothes. When her parents realized that she hadn't returned home, they contacted the friend she had been with and were told that she had left hours ago. Her parents feared the worst. It was unlike Laura to stay on the streets for long. They searched the area, and when they could not find her, they made their way to the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office to report their daughter missing. At the time, officers did not take the little girl's disappearance seriously because to them, adolescents who do not return home on time are often playing with their friends and have simply lost track of time. Back then, authorities generally did not take reports of missing adolescents seriously until they had been missing for a longer period of time. A massive search was never carried out for Laura, but authorities put up a bolo sheet. Not long, James Howard Harrison, a deputy from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office, came forward and claimed to have seen the little girl walking close to a gas station. It appeared that on the day Laura disappeared, James Howard Harrison was out on patrol. He stated the approximate time he last saw her before claiming to have carried on with his patrol. Although Laura Ann Huizar had a small stature for her age, she was feisty and outspoken. Her family claimed she was very street smart and would never have gotten into a car with a stranger. 3 days after she vanished, On the 9th of November 1983, two men discovered Laura Ann's body in a drainage ditch less than 600 yards from the gas station where she was last seen. Her body was sent for an autopsy right away, and asphyxiation was determined to be the cause of her death. She had been raped before being strangled to death. The authorities opened an investigation into the murder case, but they were unable to assemble any tangible proof from the crime scene. After the perpetrator murdered Laura Ann, he then changed the crime scene by putting the body in a drainage ditch to get rid of all the physical evidence. The murderer's actions suggested that he had prior experience handling evidence and crimes. On Laura's body, the police discovered male DNA traces. Since there was no one to match the DNA with at the time, it was kept in a sexual assault kit. The criminal database and DNA technology weren't developed enough back then to give the police any leads about the murderer. The St. Lucie County Police Department's files on Laura Ann's murder case eventually became cold. The St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office created a special cold case squad in 2020, and the team decided to re-examine Laura Ann's case. The investigation was being led by Detective Paul Taylor. The initial investigation had a lot of gaps, which were quickly identified. One of the men who had initially found Laura's body was interviewed by Detective Paul Taylor, who was surprised to be the only officer other than Deputy James Howard Harrison to speak with him. The man remembered that day and the crime scene clearly because, according to him, it had been a terribly traumatic discovery. "I see that little girl lying there every time I close my eyes," the man said. He went on to give Detective Paul Taylor a detailed account of what he had seen that day. But the detective was shocked to learn that his account didn't match the information in Laura Ann's file. "I had already been through the crime scene photos, the case file, and what they're telling me does not match what I'm seeing," said Detective Paul Taylor. He discovered through questioning the witnesses that one of their own deputies had turned the witnesses away and then moved Laura's body away from the initial crime scene. According to the witness, when they called the police to report the discovery of Laura Ann's body, Detective James Howard Harrison was the first officer to arrive at the crime scene. The man claimed that after taking his short statements from them, Harrison sent them away. Since then, they were never contacted by anyone from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office regarding the case. It was discovered that, before other officers arrived, spent 20 minutes by himself at the crime scene. The investigation was quick, no suspects were ever named, and the case was promptly filed away for almost 40 years. After hearing this testimony, Detective Paul Taylor decided to take a closer look at Deputy Harrison's background for the first time, and what he discovered was heartbreaking. In February 2022, James Howard Harrison, a former deputy sheriff for the Lucie County Sheriff's Office, was identified by Detective Paul Taylor as the primary and sole suspect in the murder of 11-year-old Laura Ann Weezer. Since the 1960s, Harrison has served as a pastor and worked in 10 different law enforcement organizations. He was the last person to see Laura alive. He kidnapped her when she was walking home, sexually assaulted her, then killed her and dumped her body in a drainage ditch. It was discovered that Harrison was fired from the sheriff's office 5 months after Laura was murdered. At the time, he had been accused of sexually assaulting several young girls in his church. Co-workers at the sheriff's office had also complained about Harrison because they believed he had behaved inappropriately around young girls while performing his duties as a deputy. "I'm actually standing there in front of this victim's family, and I'm telling them that one of our deputies is the one who did it. It's rough," a shocked detective, Taylor said. Unfortunately, Harrison passed away before the police could arrest him for the rape and murder of Laura Ann. He had died of cancer in 2008, but in the year 2020, the investigators obtained a warrant to exhume his body from the cemetery so that a DNA sample could be taken. However, by that time, the DNA from Laura's crime scene had deteriorated too much to match the sample taken from Harrison's body. However, they are certain that Laura Ann Weezer's murder was committed by former Deputy James Howard Harrison. The St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office has stated that they are certain that Harrison killed Laura Ann based on witnesses' accounts, evidence tampering, and a history of sexual assaults on young girls. Due to his inappropriate behavior with young adults, Detective Taylor claimed that Harrison was forced to resign from both his church and the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office 5 months after the murder of Laura Ann Weezer. Investigators entered Harrison's DNA into national and state databases in order to ascertain how many more victims he had. His DNA is currently being tested in a number of Florida cold cases. After the Laura N., who is our cold case, was formally closed, her older brother Joe was in total disbelief that his sister's killer could finally be revealed. It naturally was like a disbelief, a dream after all this time. "You're telling me you're able to tell us who murdered our little sister?" Joe said. The Hughes family expressed their gratitude for Detective Paul Taylor's tireless efforts in solving this case, but they expressed their disappointment with what they perceived to be a poor quality investigation at the time Laura was killed. They also expressed their desire to question all the detectives who were on the case in 1983. "From our perspective, things were purposefully overlooked and not done. There were such humongous gaps in the investigation," said the Huasar family. What do you think, guys? Did the former deputy abuse children throughout his entire life while serving as a deputy sheriff and holding a position of authority in the community as a preacher? How can we protect our women from these powerful men who take advantage of the systems and laws to further their own evil goals? Please share your opinions in the comments section below. Teresa Lynn Gibson, who went by the name Trini, was born to Robert and Hope Gibson. She lived with her family at 1427 Whittower Drive in Knoxville, Tennessee, and worked at a cafeteria and a local mall. She was very interested in plants, trees, and other living things, and hoped to later attend the University of Tennessee to study landscape architecture. In 1976, she was a 16-year-old student at Bearden High School in Knoxville. Mr. Wayne Dunlap informed the students they would be going on a surprise field trip on October 8, 1976. That morning, as her mother was driving her off at school, she asked another student if the trip was still on or not, because it was rainy, cold, and foggy. She was told yes, so she grabbed her bag to lunch and left her books in person in the car. Mr. Dunlap did not tell them where they were going until nearly all 40 students were on the bus. Mr. Dunlap would be the only adult chaperone on the trip, and they began traveling over 50 miles to the Clingmans Dome in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The plan was for the students to spend the day hiking 1.8 miles along the Forney Ridge Trail to Andrews Bald Mountain. The students were excited about the field trip, and Trini shared a seat in the back of the bus with Robert Simpson. He was a senior and a close friend of her brother Bob, who had graduated the previous May and was in the Navy. Bob had just come home on leave and had asked Robert to keep an eye on her that day, as she hadn't been away from her family for an entire day before. The bus arrived at the park around noon and parked in the Clingmans Dome lot. Mr. Dunlap told them that they were to hike to Andrews Bald and be back at the bus at 3:30, observing the plants, trees, and flowers along the way. They were also told not to go further than Andrews Bald, take any side trails, and not to interfere with any of the plant life. The students had to raise their hands to confirm they understood everything, and then they set off. At the start of the hike, the students separated into groups, and Trini walked the trail alongside Robert. The students arrived at Andrews Bald at around 1:30 p.m. Trini and Robert ate lunch together before she asked to borrow his jacket. After eating lunch, Trini said that she wanted to start the hike back to the bus, but Robert told her that he wanted to stay at the vault a little longer and track a bear. At around 3 o'clock, Trini was hiking alongside another group of students a half-mile from the parking lot. The other students stopped for a quick rest, but Trini wanted to keep going. As they stopped, they remembered seeing her walking alone in the distance before she bent down as if she was looking at something and took a right turn off the trail. The group turned their heads when another student walked towards them, but once they looked in the opposite direction again, Trini was gone. Once the students got to the spot where they last saw Trini, they noticed there was no visible side trail, but instead was thick shrubbery, ferns, rocks, and a small creek. She called Trini's name, but got no response. Assuming that she would be at the bus waiting for them, they carried on. When the students arrived back at the parking lot a half hour later, they noticed she was not there. Mr. Dunlap and another student spent some time hiking the trail she was last seen on while the other students waited on the bus. When they returned and determined that Trini was indeed missing, he contacted the National Park Service and filed a report at 4:30 p.m. Soon after, the bus left without Trini and Mr. Dunlap and headed back to Knoxville. Mr. Dunlap stayed behind to assist with the search. The school bus arrived later than originally scheduled, and when it did, school officials had to tell the Gibsons that their daughter was missing. They quickly headed to the Smoky Mountains to wait for news of their daughter. By 6:30 p.m., volunteers had gathered to begin looking for the missing student. The trail was popular with walkers, and her sudden disappearance was strange given that she had been with other people and there had been groups of students both in front of them and behind, as well as other hikers. Over the course of the next several days, a massive search was performed of the park by both ground and air, but she could not be found. Heavy rains, wind, and fog that night made conditions very difficult for searching. A partially opened can of beer and 3 cigarette butts were found near the spot where Trini stepped off the Forney Ridge Trail, but none of the other students admitted to having brought beer on the trip. A number of different search dogs would pick up Trini's scent at the spot where Forney Ridge Trail intersected with the Appalachian Trail. The search dogs tracked Trini's scent to the base of the Clingmans Dome observation tower and to the shoulder of a paved road 1.6 miles from the dome at Collins Gap. There is also a parking lot in this area. More cigarette butts of the same brand that was found in the woods were found on the shoulder of the paved road. Several sets of dogs all had the same conclusive results, as well as dogs brought in by Trini's uncles. With the fog in the area that afternoon, it would have been easy for her to have gotten lost after she stepped off the trail. However, the scent trail caused speculation that she may have been abducted, kept hidden at the Clingmans Dome observation tower until the other students left the area, and then led through the woods to the road by her abductor and driven away in a vehicle. The search lasted from October 8th until November 1st, 1976. Another search from April 18th to May 5th, 1977 found no trace of any remains in the park. The chief ranger told reporters he was almost certain she was not in the park. Searchers went back to the Clingmans Dome area in 1981, but again, nothing. Trini's family had suspicions about another student named Kelvin Bowman. Several months earlier, Kelvin had attempted to break into the Gibson home before Trini's mother shot him in the foot. He was ultimately sentenced to time in a correctional facility. When he was sentenced, he had made threats in the courtroom to harm Trini when he was released. From what the principal could determine, Kelvin Bowman was attending classes at Bearden the day Trini disappeared. He was released after only serving 6 months and was back attending Bearden High School at the time she went missing. Some students claimed they thought they saw Kelvin's car following the bus while it drove to the park, but Mr. Dunlap insisted there were no vehicles following the bus that morning. Kelvin would later be arrested in 1978 for raping a woman in her apartment and was convicted of third-degree criminal sexual conduct. Some suspicion was also directed towards Robert Simpson, as multiple witnesses reported seeing Trini's comb, which she always carried in the right hip pocket of her jeans, on the dashboard of Robert's car following her disappearance. Her family said she never went anywhere without that comb and wouldn't have easily parted with it. He had been using it to comb his own hair, and once her brother Bob had seen it, he questioned him and Robert told him that Trini had given him the comb to hold onto for her. Trini also had an expensive star sapphire pendant and a ring on when she disappeared, which were her Christmas and birthday presents. They were found in the possession of a girl at the high school. She could not satisfactorily explain how she came to have them. While Trini's parents were participating in the search effort for her, Robert stopped by the Gibson residence and made some odd remarks to Trini's sister about how if Kelvin Bowman had Trini, he'd kill her and that she may have run off with some horny hitchhiker. In spite of multiple searches of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, no trace of Trini has ever been found. Following her disappearance, her family sold their home and moved to a new neighborhood to not have so many now painful memories. But over time, the loss continued to take its toll and her parents divorced. Trini's older brother Robert Jr. died in 2000 at the age of 42 and Robert Sr. died in 2004 at the age of 67. Her sister Tina died in 2016 at the age of 54. As of today, Trini has never been located and this case remains unsolved. A 29-year-old mother of 2 named Mary Mathis Davis vanished without a trace in Lexington on the 30th of May, 1987. The news of her disappearance devastated her family and friends. The following day, her body was discovered behind a nearby supermarket, and the discovery shocked the neighborhood. Despite the police department's best efforts, the case remained unsolved for more than 30 years before a breakthrough in 2023. This case takes us to the city of Lexington in North Carolina. The city of Lexington has a rich and diverse cultural heritage, and its well-known barbecue has earned it the title barbecue capital of the world. Beyond its delectable cuisine, Lexington has a charming downtown populated with interesting stores and eateries that reflect the city's warm and welcoming nature. Popular with tourists, the city's historic uptown Lexington neighborhood has beautifully preserved early 19th century building. On February 12, 1958, Mary Mathis Davis was born in Lexington, although little is known about her early years. She had a sister named Lisa Hinkle, whom she grew up with. Mary and Lisa had a tight-knit bond in such a way that nothing could separate the both of them. Lisa described her sister as a lovely, compassionate person who never failed to brighten up a room with her contagious smile. Mary was also said to have had a talent for putting people at ease. When the two came of age, Mary got to meet a man named Richard Davis. A spark began to develop between them as they got to know one another, and before they knew it, they were engulfed in a passionate relationship. As their relationship progresses, Richard Davis knew he wanted to spend the rest of his life with Mary. Mary was overcome with joy when he one day suddenly asked her to be his wife. Without hesitating, she said yes to his proposal. Following the proposal, and Richard started to eagerly make plans for their future as a couple. They talked for hours on end about what their future held, sharing their goals and aspirations for the life they were about to begin. The big day quickly approached, and the couple exchanged vows in a charming and private ceremony. Following the wedding ceremony, Mary and Richard began a new chapter in their lives, and eagerly anticipated the journey that lay ahead. The years passed quickly, and Mary and Richard soon had two lovely children. The first child was a boy, and the second, Tracy, was a girl. Mary's heart brimmed with love, and she cherished every second she had with her kids. Later on, she accepted a position at Lexington's Lanier's Ace hardware store in order to support her expanding family. Mary didn't mind the fact that the work wasn't the most glamorous. She was appreciative of the chance to generate a consistent income. Even though Mary didn't make much money, it was still enough to pay the bills and put food on the table. Mary was determined to give her family the best life she could despite the difficulties that came with balancing the demands of motherhood and working a job. Life went on at a good pace as the days turned into weeks, then weeks into months. Mary's family was doing well and she was happy inside. But tragedy was lurking around the corner, ready to strike whenever anyone least expected it. On May 30th, 1987, left her house as usual to go to work. Though it seemed like any other Saturday, she had no idea that it would be her last day on Earth. When Mary got to work, she smiled and said hello to her colleagues before starting her day. She eagerly got started on her task. But as the hours passed, she noticed that she was growing hungry and restless. By noon, her tummy was grumbling and she painstakingly waited for lunchtime. When the time finally came, she was relieved to have the opportunity to leave the four walls of her workplace. She anticipated treating herself to a nice meal. She checked her purse to see if she had enough cash to get herself lunch. And when she was certain she did, she left her store and went to a nearby restaurant. No one would ever again see Mary alive after this. She didn't go back to work again. Once her lunch break was over, her absence became more obvious with each second that went by. Her coworkers couldn't help but wonder what was taking her so long. Their confusion changed into worry as the minutes felt like hours. They knew they needed to find her quickly because there were no indications of her return. One of them offered without hesitation to look for her at the eatery where she went to have lunch. The coworker hurried to the eatery as her heart was racing, but Mary was not there. The staff at the restaurant was of no assistance either, and the situation was getting worse. When the coworker went back to the hardware store, she reported that she could not find Mary at the eatery. As soon as they heard this, the hardware store employees started to feel afraid and realized they needed to act more seriously. They picked up the phone and dialed the emergency number without delaying further. After providing details of what had happened, the police arrived almost immediately. The coworkers also called Mary's husband and parents in order to inform them of what was happening. Police started looking for Mary right away that day, but at first they found nothing. She was completely absent from sight. As words of her disappearance spread, a sense of fear and uncertainty overcame the neighborhood. On the other hand, Mary's family was left to struggle through the pain of not knowing where she was or what had happened to her. But they hoped and prayed that their dear Mary would be found alive and well. That night, Richard had a hard time falling asleep. His thoughts kept him up at night. He had a gut feeling that a serious problem had befallen his family. He realized that Mary's disappearance was not a straightforward case of getting lost in the city because it did not make sense to him. His mind wanders to their kids, and how he would look them in the face the following day. Unaware of the potential danger to their mother, the innocent kids had been asking Richard of their mother. The idea of breaking the news to them that she might never return again was too painful for Richard to bear. But he was aware that he needed to be there for his kids all the way. The next morning, as the sun rose, the search for Mary persisted, but it seemed like all the efforts were in vain. Mary's family and the police were anxiously searching for any information about her sudden disappearance. As the day wore on, the police abruptly received a call reporting the discovery of a dead body behind the building of a nearby supermarket called Winn-Dixie. After the call, a small group of police officers rushed to the scene right away. After seeing a small crowd forming around the body's discovery, the police officers moved in to quickly secure the area. The body had clearly been there for some time, as they could see. It was already starting to emit a slight odor of decay. They were able to recognize the body as belonging to Mary Mathis Davis after closer examination. The officers showed shock and disbelief, but they also knew they needed to get to the root of the investigation. There was no immediate indication of the cause of death, so the police started looking around right away for any possible clues. They also questioned the supermarket staff, but none of them appeared to be particularly knowledgeable about what had happened to the victim. The body was then removed for an autopsy after that. One of the policemen showed up at Mary's family's house the day her body was discovered. As the atmosphere was tensed, the officer broke the heartbreaking news to her family. He offered his condolences and shared what little information they had about Mary's incident. The news was indeed a tragic one, as Mary's family was left broken and inconsolable. After a few days, Mary's autopsy results came out, and it was discovered that she was strangled to death. It was also found out that she had experienced sexual assault. As a result of this, Mary's death was classified as a homicide. The authorities started looking into Mary's death as her family was left to mourn and stay strong. The investigators were determined to find the answers to the many unanswered questions they had. Investigators had DNA samples that had been gathered from the crime scene as pieces of evidence. Though there wasn't much that could be done with this due to the lack of advanced DNA technology at the time. Regardless of the shortcomings, detectives diligently pursued every lead and tip that came their way, working day and night. At a point, they appealed to the general public for assistance, with the hope that someone would come forward with information that would help solve the mystery behind the case. But all efforts proved abortive. The detectives felt defeated because it appeared as though the murderer had vanished from the face of the earth. As the days dragged on, becoming weeks and then months, the murderer seemed to have eluded capture. However, Mary's family never lost hope and held on to the belief that justice would eventually be served no matter how long it took. They made an effort to move on with their lives, but the scars from their loss never completely healed. Nearly 25 years after Mary's murder, Lisa, her sister, came out and spoke to the media about the tragedy and pain that she had her family members had to go through when Mary was snatched from them. She spoke candidly to the press about the pain they had experienced and how difficult life had been without her cherished sister by her side. The family had never given up hope that they would one day find the closure they so desperately sought, as Lisa reflected on the happy times they spent together with Mary. Despite the pain and loss, she revealed that the family was not interested in exacting revenge and that she was prepared to offer Mary's killer forgiveness. A new group of detectives working on Mary's murder case in 2022 made the decision to examine the evidence at hand. They had knowledge about the developments in DNA technology and were confident that, compared to 1987, they now stood a better chance of cracking the case. After that, the detectives then delivered some tangible evidence to the North Carolina State Crime Lab. The North Carolina Bureau of Investigation was contacted to look into the case based on the encouraging results of the analysis of the evidence. From that point on, things accelerated. The Texas-based private forensic genealogy laboratory called OTHRM was contacted by the State Bureau of Investigation. DNA piece of evidence was then sent to OTHRM, where scientists were able to create a genealogical profile for potential suspects. The unidentified male suspect was finally identified after months of diligent work. Russell Grant Woods was the name given as the murderer of Mary Mathis Davis. The detectives felt relieved after making the discovery because they were certain that the case had been solved. There was a problem. There was no way to bring the murderer to justice because, according to a background check, he had passed away in 2013 at the age of 58. Russell Grant Wood had previously been named as a suspect in the case, but detectives were forced to focus their attention elsewhere at the time due to a lack of sufficient evidence. Not only that, it was however learned that Mary and Russell Grant Wood had known each other before her death, although it is unclear what kind of relationship they had. If Russell Grant Wood had still been alive, the state would have moved forward with indictments and accused him of first-degree rape, kidnapping, and murder. Mary's surviving family learned of the case's breakthrough on February 3, 2023. They thanked the detectives for their commitment to the investigation. We prayed that one day we will find the person who violently murdered our beloved Mary. We now have some answers. Although that won't bring Mary back, it does give us a sense of closure. Lori Martin, Mary's niece, told the press. On February 12, 2023, Mary's family held a memorial celebration at Forest Hill Memorial Park in Mary's honor. If she was still alive, that day would have marked her 65th birthday. Mary was a light in this world, and we were blessed to have her as long as we did. She was a loving mother, wife, sister, and friend. We know she is resting easily in the arms of our Lord and Savior. Lori Martin said, "There are still many questions that we will never have the answers to, even though the mystery surrounding Mary's death has been solved and the murderer has been found. What sort of connection do you think Mary and Russell had? Post your ideas in the comments section to share with us." Shelley Lynn Jones Moog was born June 29, 1986, and was described as a kind, beloved teacher and an amazing mother. She is a native of Erie, Pennsylvania, and graduated General McLean High School. She then went on to graduate from Middle Tennessee State University with a degree in teaching. At the age of 18, she met Tyler Moog in Pennsylvania, and the two quickly married in 2004 when she became pregnant. The couple moved to Tennessee to live near his family and had a daughter named Liliana and called her Lily. In 2009, after 6 years of a rough marriage for Shelley, the couple divorced. Shelley moved into an apartment in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and began working as an 8th grade teacher at Harris Middle High School. Tyler remained in Shelbyville, living on Old Nashville Dirt Road where the couple had lived. Tyler is described as violent and angry and was once arrested after he allegedly tried to run her vehicle off the road. He was also suspected of vandalizing her home twice, although no charges were filed in those incidents. Soon after, Shelley would go missing. She was last seen on February 28, 2011, after she arrived at his home to drop their daughter off as they had shared custody at the time. He later stated she was upset when she went inside his house, said she thought her new boyfriend was being unfaithful. He said Shelley stayed at his home for about an hour and then left to run some errands, promising to return before 10 p.m. She was supposed to meet a maintenance worker at her new apartment at 4:30 p.m., but she never arrived. At 12:30 a.m. the next morning, her white Pontiac Grand Prix was found abandoned and burned in an empty farm field off US 41A southeast of Murfreesboro, roughly 30 miles from where Tyler lived. It wasn't until Tyler reported her missing a few days later that police realized the vehicle belonged to 24-year-old Shelley. Authorities determined the cause of the fire was arson, using gasoline as an accelerant. Unfortunately, the fire destroyed whatever clues might have been there, but no signs of human remains were found. Shelley had the day off of work on March 1st, the day after she was last seen, which is part of the reason no one immediately realized she was missing. But when she didn't show up for work the next day after that, everyone became concerned. It would eventually be determined that the burned car was Shelley's. Once cops cleared the maintenance man that she was scheduled to meet and her new boyfriend, they shifted their focus back on her ex-husband. It turns out that he had been abusive and even cruel to Shelley during their marriage, and was angry that she had begun dating another man. After Shelley's disappearance, her parents got in a custody battle with Tyler over the couple's daughter. Witnesses testified that Tyler used and sold illicit drugs and was violent, and that he verbally and physically abused Shelley. In a court deposition for the custody case, Tyler refused to answer most questions about the day of Shelley's disappearance and pleaded the fifth over 150 times. On the advice of counsel, I respectfully declined to answer on the grounds of the Fifth Amendment. A specialist in forensic interviews with children asked Lily about the day her mom disappeared. Lily said they went to Tyler's home and she stayed in the car while her mother went to the door. Lily stated that later her dad took her out of the car seat and took her to a bedroom and closed the door and told her not to come out. She never actually saw her mother again after she got out of the car. Shelley's relatives were eventually given custody of Lily as the court thought Tyler was an unfit parent due to his drug activity and history of domestic violence. Tyler's family appealed this decision but lost. According to public court records, his prior criminal convictions include reckless endangerment, theft of property, an alteration of serial numbers, and several witnesses testified about his verbal and physical abuse towards Shelley. 10 days after she went missing, detectives found surveillance video from a convenience store a few miles from Tyler's home. It shows him the morning after her disappearance, pulling up in his truck to the dumpster where he remained for 5 to 10 minutes. Investigators in the custody case found another revelation involving Lily. They found out that Tyler had been talking to his daughter about burning down his ex-mother-in-law's home. He wanted to give her matches so she could help burn down her house. Thankfully, Shelley's family won custody of Lily, preventing her from being subjected to any more of that abuse. After Shelley's disappearance, he pocket-dialed 911 and a 22-minute conversation was recorded between him and his father while working without him realizing it. Some of the conversation with his father is garbled and difficult to hear, but Tyler seems to be talking about the night Shelley disappeared and how he was innocent and other things related to the case. Part of the 911 call can be heard on YouTube under Tyler Mook's accidental call to 911. Minutes later, he calls 911 back and asks if they got a call from his number earlier and if they record stuff like that. Some people speculate that the call wasn't an accident, but instead was actually on purpose to make himself look innocent. Tyler moved to Palm City, Florida shortly after the 911 call, looking to start a new life. In October 2014, over 3 years after his ex-wife went missing, Tyler attacked his girlfriend Robin on his speedboat and threw her into the water and tried to hold her under. Robin says she didn't know anything about Tyler Mook's past in Tennessee, and for a while she didn't even know his real name, because he had told her it was Cook. She says she saw Moog racing on the side of his boat and asked what it meant. He told her that was his last name and that he had been joking when he told her it was Cook. She then searched for him online and found out about his past. She talked to her mother, who told her to get away from him. She told him what she learned, and he charmed her into believing it wasn't true, and they remained together. One day, Robin and Tyler, along with his brother Andrew and his girlfriend Nicole, went out for a cruise on his speedboat. He first became angry at her for being late, and then spent the day drinking. He was speeding so much that she became scared and kept yelling at him to slow down. She again tried to get him to slow down when speeding through a no-wake zone. He eventually shut the motor off, threw her cell phone, and threw her over the boat into the water. He then jumped in and held her under the water. She managed to come up for air a couple times, but he kept holding her underwater. When she managed to get up for air at one point, she yelled for Tyler's brother to help. His brother jumped in and put Tyler in a chokehold. And meanwhile, another boat arrived and she begged them to get her out of the water, stating that he just tried to kill her. He fled the scene after saying, "No one disrespects me in front of my family and I will kill her." The second boat took her to shore and she reported the incident to police. He was then arrested that night, but his mom quickly bailed him out. Robin then got a restraining order against him. Days after the incident on the boat, detectives from Tennessee came to Florida and met with Robin. The battery charges against Tyler were escalated to attempted murder in the first degree. During trial, Tyler's brother testified despite his family trying to prevent him from doing so. He said at the end of the day he loves his brother, but he had to tell the truth and describe the same scenario that Robin described. His defense argued he had simply lost his temper and had not intended to kill his girlfriend. The jury's verdict was guilty on the lesser charge of attempted second-degree murder. Tyler was sentenced to 12 years in prison. During the trial, Shelley's mother was there for Robin. He remains a person of interest in Shelley's case, but since there is no body or crime scene, investigators have had a difficult time being able to charge him with her alleged murder. Investigators do not believe that he acted alone, as he would have needed help disposing of the car and getting back home while having his daughter. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation later searched a van owned by Tyler's neighbor, but wouldn't say what led them to the neighbor's van or how it might be connected. Shelley has never been found, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. 23-year-old Krista Bromlett was residing in a mobile home in New Providence, Tennessee in 1996. New Providence, which was formerly a small railroad community, was taken over by the nearby community of Clarksville. New Providence saw rising crime rates over the ensuing years, including an increase in drug-related offenses and commercial burglaries. Krista Bromlett regrettably fell victim to these problems. Her case remained cold until after 22 years when her killer was finally arrested. Krista Bromlett was born in 1973 in California to Jim Langley and Kim Venable. Krista was renowned for being witty, compassionate, and smart. Despite having a tight-knit relationship with her family, she made the decision to be financially independent and started living alone. She and her mother had shared a home together in Clarksville until in 1995 when her mother moved to Corpus Christi, Texas with Krista's 2 young children. Krista wanted to stay back because she hoped to finish her GED program in Clarksville. She then lived alone in a mobile home while pursuing her high school equivalency so she could provide a better life for her 2 kids. Although her family described her as warm and loving, her neighbor thought she was distant. In the afternoon of October 28, 1996, Krista Bromlett's landlord, Jeff Pennington, knocked on the door of her trailer in the Sunnydale Mobile Home Park just off Peachers Mill Road. The landlord wanted to discuss with Krista about a recent fire outbreak that occurred a week before, but she never responded. Jeff, however, discovered something terrible while attempting to contact Krista. In the living room, he saw the shoeless body of Krista Bromlett laying in the flickering glow of a small colored television. A terrified Jeff Pennington said, "Then I called the police." Police in Clarksville, Tennessee were looking into several home killings of women at the time of Krista's murder. Police insisted that the murders had nothing to do with this particle case. When Krista passed away, the Montgomery County Medical Examiner performed an autopsy on her, and the Clarksville Police Department Crime Scene Unit processed the mobile home, looking for any available evidence to pinpoint the killer. According to the autopsy, Krista Bromlett died by suffocation and a rape kit revealed signs of sexual assault. The forensics sent their DNA findings from the rape kit to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's lab, who then loaded the data from that kit into Cody's in the hopes of finding a match. About 6 detectives began the investigation by interviewing between 50 and 60 neighbors in an effort to identify potential witnesses. A neighbor claimed to have seen Krista on the 27th of October, 1996, sitting on her porch as she always did, but Krista had a distant demeanor and people typically left her alone. Police expected to make an arrest within a week after receiving nearly a dozen tips. But the leads fizzled out, no potential suspects were located, and the years passed without an arrest. Detective Michael Ure of the Clarksville Police Department did not receive the news he so wanted until after 22 years in February 13, 2019. It happened that the DNA of the suspect from Krista's rape kit had eventually matched a suspect who was located in Phoenix, Arizona. The DNA on Cody's matched to a 48-year-old man named Kenneth Hudspeth. Detective Michael Ulrey stated that Hudspeth hadn't been mentioned in the investigation up to this point, and no one had noticed him. When Detective Ulrey spoke with the suspect in April, he learned that Hudspeth had indeed lived in the Clarksville at the time of Krista's murder and had left the city in December 1997. Hudspeth didn't deny all the facts presented to him. He claimed to be a friend of Krista, and he allegedly acknowledged being the last person to see her alive. Hudspeth was taken into custody and charged with homicide as a result of the DNA evidence, and this interview was transferred to Tennessee to await trial after waiving extradition. Investigators learned from Hudspeth's arrest records that he had been detained on multiple occasions for offenses like domestic assault and felony assault. He has served time in jails in Texas and Arizona. His DNA should have been in Cody's years ago, but investigators think the evidence chain of custody may have resulted in lost or ruined swabs. Hudspeth asserted that he had previously done drugs with Krista Bramlett while residing in Clarksville's Sunnydale Mobile Home Park. These allegations were refuted by Krista Bramlett's toxicology report, which revealed a low blood alcohol content. When asked if he had sex with her, he initially denied it. But after seeing the autopsy results and the DNA found inside Bramlett and on her bra, he admitted that he had been so high that he couldn't recall whether or not he had sex with her. "I was on bad dope. Know her. Did I have sex with her? I don't remember that," Hudspeth said in the courtroom. "I just don't see myself raping and killing this woman. I hope I didn't," he said again. As soon as there was a break in the case, Krista Bramlett's family members were informed. "I knew all along that it was just a matter of time. There was never a doubt in our minds that they'd find who had done it," Krista's grandmother said. Finally, after long, painful 22 years, in January 2022, 52-year-old Kenneth Hudspeth was found guilty by the judge and was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Krista Bramlett. The terrifying thing about this case was that an innocent man almost received a false execution. The mysterious death of Daryl Johnson was thought to be resolved for the majority of 2 decades before heartbreakingly resurfacing as a cold case in 2001. 8 a.m. on February 24, 1982 was a typical day for all school children in Nampa, Idaho. That morning, 9-year-old Daryl Johnson was seen walking 6 blocks from her house to the Lincoln Elementary School. But she unfortunately never made it there. Her disappearance sparked reaction from concerned neighbors and friends who, alongside with her family, came out en masse to search for her in the whole of Nampa. However, the massive search for Darlin ended 3 days later when a couple of fishermen found her body near the Snake River in rural Canyon County. According to an autopsy, Darlin had been sexually assaulted and had blunt force trauma to her torso and head. Male DNA and hair were also taken by the police from the crime scene. Almost immediately, 34-year-old Charles Fain was arrested in September on suspicion of raping and killing Darylund. A hair sample that Charles Fain voluntarily provided to the police, combined with the fact that he lived a block away from the Johnsons' family, led to his arrest. Fain denied having any part in the killing of Darlene after being taken into custody, and he also passed the polygraph test. However, despite his denial and him passing the test, he was still accused of killing Daryl Johnson. During his trial, prosecutors hinted at the possibility that a shoe trail discovered close to Daryl's body belonged to Fain. In addition, 2 informants from the prison said they overheard Fain confessing to the crime. The 2 informants also got a shorter jail term in return for their testimony. Fain steadfastly maintained his claim that he was innocent despite the evidence they mounted against him. He claimed that he was 100 miles away from the neighborhood where Daryl was killed. The other witnesses supported his testimony, but the judge did not rule out Fain as a suspect despite the absence of solid evidence and no reliable witnesses against him. Charles Fain's polygraph results were accepted as evidence in court, and the DNA technology available at the time was insufficient to establish Fain's innocence. Fain was found guilty on November 4, 1983, and was given a death sentence in March of the following year, but he was later imprisoned for nearly 20 years. In the year 1991, he was only 4 days away from being put to death, but surprisingly, his execution date was postponed. It was then acknowledged 8 years later in 1999. When DNA technology was a little more developed, that the hair DNA discovered on Daryl Johnson's body did not actually belong to Fain, but rather to an unidentified man. Fain was then cleared right away. He was discharged from the maximum security facility in Idaho in August 1999. Several years later, in 2019, detectives reopened the case, and by the next year, they used genetic genealogy to identify David Dalrymple as a suspect. He was 64 years old, and his DNA matched the sample discovered at the crime scene. Dalrymple was already serving a life sentence for kidnapping and abusing a child in 2004. He was formally charged for killing Daryl N. Johnson in January 2022. He is still being held in prison and could soon receive a second life sentence or the death penalty. Charles Fain, on the other hand, is happy to be out of bars and is glad that the perpetrator has finally been caught. He was given a sum of $1,400,000 to compensate for his wrongful conviction and the 18 years he spent in prison. Fain recently purchased a truck for himself using part of the money he received for his wrongful conviction. John Andrews Cheek was born August 3, 1965 to Irina and Richard Cheek. He was described as a social, meticulous, driven, and competitive person. He earned a bachelor's and master's degree in business administration. In 1993, at the age of 28, he was the chief financial officer for the Cates Company, one of Memphis, Tennessee's largest real estate companies. Cates managed 24 apartment complexes worth more than $100 million and was scheduled to go public in early December of 1993 as a real estate investment trust called Mid-America Apartment Communities Incorporated. For months, John was under a tremendous amount of pressure and had been working 18-hour days and traveling around the world meeting and working with investors. When the deal finalized, it would have pushed his salary up to $110,000 and given him $2 million in stock options, among other financial benefits, making him a millionaire. He had taken a 3-day business trip to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Portland, Oregon, and Denver, Colorado to work out the deal, but it was unexpectedly delayed due to questions by the Securities and Exchange Commission, which affected him greatly, and so he took a late-night flight back to Memphis. It's unclear the details of what the problem was with the deal, but he returned almost despondent and very depressed according to his colleagues. He told friends that he had not slept for 3 days when he arrived back to Memphis at 6 a.m. on December 1, 1993. Instead of going home to sleep, he went straight to work and worked throughout the evening before leaving for dinner. About 11 p.m., one of his business associates dropped him off at the Crescent Center on Poplar and Ridgeway Streets in Memphis where his car was parked. He had just finished having dinner at the Cooker restaurant across the street and was intoxicated. On Thursday the next day, John did not show up for work, and by Friday morning his parents reported him missing. Saturday morning, his great 1987 Acura Legend was found abandoned on Interstate 55 near the Memphis, Arkansas Bridge on the Delaware exit ramp now called the Metal Museum exit. The car was 12 miles away from his home, and his loved ones could not think of any reason why he would want to drive there. Investigators are not sure what happened to John. Authorities initially believed he took his own life by jumping into the Mississippi River, but an extensive search of the river did not reveal his body, and his loved ones do not believe he would have committed suicide. His suitcases were found unpacked at the home he just bought at 6214 Heather Street in East Memphis, and towels his mother had placed on his bed prior to his trip had been moved. The garage door, which he always kept shut, was left open. One theory is that he developed a mental disorder due to the stress of his job and may not recall his identity, but he had no known history of mental illness prior to his disappearance. His company did go national as planned, and an audit of the business found no evidence of wrongdoing on John's part, but because he was missing, he was never given the financial rewards he had earned. On February 14, 1994, a trucker named Ron Jackson walked into White's truck stop in Raffine, Virginia. He noticed a clean-shaven young man in a white shirt and tie watching television near the cash register. The next morning, Ron saw him again, dozing in a chair. The young man had a change of clothing with him wrapped in a belt. Ron noticed that the man did not sound like he came from the streets and had claimed to be living in an Arkansas homeless shelter and traveling around with truckers and was on his way to Richmond. But Ron felt that there may have been something wrong with him mentally. Ron asked him to join him for breakfast, offering to cover the bill when the young man said he didn't have any money. After having breakfast, Ron left heading to his next stop in West Memphis, Arkansas, where he noticed John's missing persons flyer. Ron recognized John as the man he had met the previous day at a truck stop in Raffine, Virginia, 700 miles from John's hometown. John's family is certain that the man was John, but there is no way to be sure. The drifter had spoken perfect English and wore a pair of moccasins that were the same type that were missing from John's house. His family believes he could be suffering from stress-induced amnesia due to a mental breakdown. Some people wonder if it's possible for a man on the verge of becoming a millionaire to be begging for meals at a truck stop. Ray Sexton, a Memphis psychiatrist and longtime family friend, also suggested that John may have developed a form of amnesia due to the extreme stress he experienced at work. The medical term for this rare condition is a fugue state. Sexton explained that John was obsessed with a big project, and it is possible that this was so overwhelming to him that he blocked out his own identity. John had gone 3 months without getting a full night's sleep because he was so consumed with the project. But typically, fugue states only last minutes to days or months at the longest. It is unclear if John met with foul play, was in a fugue state, or jumped off the bridge. But as of today, this case remains unsolved. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.